Thank you for attending the WiSys Managing Bins is Essential webinar. Today we're going to have two speakers and presenters. First, we're going to have Don Beer, who's the Director of Consulting and Support, and Michael Hollinger, who is the Vice President here at WiSys. They're going to give you a nice webinar for about an hour here. If you guys could please ask any questions in the GoToWebinar menu, I will be happy to, we'll answer those at the end of the meeting, and we'll have a few minutes to do some question and answer for you. But thank you for joining us. And Don, can you, would you please take over?
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, my name is Don Beer. Most of the service organization at WiSys reports to me, and we have a lot of experience in warehouse management. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about that. So first, who is WiSys? Well, WiSys has been in business for 14 years, and we've been delivering WMS solutions all 14 of those years. We have 360 plus customers across many, many industries and countries. And our solutions are purpose-built to fit unique business processes. This is kind of our claim to fame. One of the greatest parts about our company is our products are tool set based, and we can easily change our software to adapt to many unique business processes across those many industries. And we're very proud of that, and most of our customers are happy that we can do that. We also integrate directly with the bins and serial batches in Business One. So today we're going to go over the basics of warehouse organization. And this is going to cover how things flow through a warehouse. And all of these things that were topics that we're going to discuss today will help you think about if you haven't turned on bins yet and you haven't implemented bins and you're thinking about a WMS, all of these topics are things that you should consider and think about before actually physically turning on the bins in your Business One system. So we're going to cover warehouse organization. We're going to cover marking the warehouse. I'm going to cover wireless infrastructure, mobile device selection, and some considerations when printing. And then Michael's going to show you the last half of this webinar. Michael will show you some features and functionality of bins in Business One. So let's get started with warehouse organization. This is kind of just a cutout of a typical warehouse. Many people have, receiving doors on one side of the warehouse, shipping docks on the opposite side of the warehouse, production and fulfillment kind of in the middle. So the physical layout are parts of that. The layout and the conversations that you need to have internally are if we're going to automate our warehouse, where do we store product? How do we go about storing that product? How do we go about moving it from one part of the warehouse to the other? For example, if you have the luxury of having a receiving dock on one side and a shipping dock on the other, your transactions in the material movement in your warehouse may physically be different than if you use your shipping dock and your receiving dock are one and the same. What I mean by that is, let's say you have a shipping and receiving dock that's one and the same. So a truck may back up to the dock, and because you have shipments that you're trying to get out at the same time, you need to unload that truck and put the product away at the same time you're unloading it, because you really don't have room on the dock to fill it up with a bunch of product that you're receiving inbound. If you have the luxury of having receiving docks on one side of your building and separate shipping docks elsewhere, your business system transactions may be completely different. You may actually unload the truck to get him out of the dock, put all the product, leave it sit on the dock, check it out, count it, verify it, fill out paperwork if you're doing that manually, or if you're in a transactional-based WMS, you would do the receipts then. And then you would do what's called a put-away transaction, where you physically put the product away after you've already received it. So those kinds of considerations and your space requirements are critical to planning for bins. The same holds true in the production area. Do you have multiple production lines if you manufacture goods? Do you have the luxury of staging all the product to the end of the production line, all the raw materials that are going to get consumed in the production line, and likewise reporting at the opposite end of the production line? Do you have the space and the flexibility to just leave that product sit there and have somebody put it away later, or do you need to get that product out of the way as quickly as possible? And again, that same concept holds true to the shipping dock. I talked a little bit about that if you're sharing or receiving in a shipping dock, but do you have the space to stage up a bunch of shipments? If you don't, or do you stage shipments in the aisles of, in between products? Think about how you're logically, your materials moving throughout your building. Another thing to consider in physical warehouse is, do you have more than one warehouse? If you do have more than one warehouse, what is the function of that warehouse? So does it just store raw materials and you really don't do any shipping or receiving or anything out of there? It's just used for overflow? Or is it a fully functional warehouse, maybe on the East Coast instead of the West Coast? And it needs to do all the same kinds of transactions and have the same kind of functionality that your other warehouse has. Ceiling height. In the physicalness of a warehouse, ceiling height matters. So in this example, this warehouse doesn't have very high ceilings. So pallet racking may not be an efficient option for you to store your materials. On the contrary, if you have really high ceilings, pallet racking may be a better option for you than floor storage in an area where you don't have high ceilings. When you're organizing your warehouse, do you need to take into consideration, do you have places to store high moving items? Perhaps your finished goods that you ship to your customers, you have 80% of your customers consume 20% of your inventory. So do you need to have a space requirements to put that inventory up near the shipping dock or in a location near the shipping dock that makes it more efficient? So when you're organizing your warehouse, you need to think about the value that binning your warehouse brings. I'm a huge fan of bins and turning bins on because it's the quickest and easiest way to figure out exactly how much inventory you have and where it's at. So let's talk about some pros with turning on bins. We've already talked about it, but the organization, it helps you bring organization to your warehouse. You know exactly what quantities you have and where they are. That's a huge benefit and probably the biggest benefit of turning on bins. When you have bin turns on, you can validate your inventory quickly. You can count at the bin levels. There are many customers of ours who are used to the traditional shut the warehouse down once a year, get every employee we have out there and start counting it. And then the accountants have to reconcile all the tags and go through that whole process. After creating bins and bringing some organizational structure and implementing a WMS, you can validate your inventory quicker. And many of those customers don't even do a shutdown physical inventory. They just cycle count their warehouse throughout the year. And many customers can cycle count their entire warehouse once a quarter. And when you have bins, we're able to provide direction. This is especially popular with a lot of our food-based customers that have lot control or batch control, where they want to make sure that they're shipping out the oldest lot first. So if you have bins turn on, we can direct you through the warehouse and let you know where you should go to get the oldest product first. With the good, there's always the bad. So let's talk about some cons. It takes away your ability to just stick stuff wherever you want. You can still do that to some degree with bins, but it's not quite as flexible as when you don't have bins. You have to do more transactions to keep the system up to date. If you turn the bin layer on and you don't have a WMS, now customers are, your employees are going to have to write down, I took this product from here and I put it over here. So, and that usually equates to more transactions. And because you're writing things down, it takes more time to do those transactions. And finally, I already referenced it, but you're writing down more information in a manual environment. With a WMS virtually takes away every one of these cons. So once you have the bin layer turned on, you need to start thinking about a numbering scheme. What are we gonna call our bins? How are we gonna do that? So you can see the picture on the left where we have black circles around, those are aisles. And then the green represents, those are bins. So in this particular instance, there's 3 pallet positions between posts. So those are bins. The area between the posts is a bay, and then the levels going up are levels. So the picture to the right is a screenshot of the bin location master data in SAP Business One. So you can see that the picture on the left is laid out very similar to warehouse, aisle, shelf, and level that by default comes in SAP. Now you have the ability to change the names of those to fit your terminology in SAP if you want to. If you don't have the luxury of having pallet racking, and your warehouse is more like we talked about the low ceilings before, you're normally going to use floor storage. And with floor storage, many customers organize those by the areas between the beams. So here you can see between the posts going north and south, we have aisles, and then the posts going east and west, we create bays. To take that scenario one level further, many people, or most people that are doing floor storage, then begin to paint lines on the floor to delineate bins. So the bay is the area between the columns, but you may end up with 10 bins between each column to further delineate and give you better ways to find your inventory. When the numbering scheme, a couple things to remember in a numbering scheme. If you make the numbering scheme too granular, if you make your bins too small, then that kind of defeats the purpose, because now you're doing so many transactions, because every time you move something 2 feet, you have to record where you moved it to. So a bin or a numbering scheme that's too granular is too difficult, and users get frustrated and they just stop doing it. If it's too broad, then it still makes it hard to gain some of those pros that we talked about earlier with cycle counting and things like that. So now that we have our warehouse organized, and we've thought about all the ways material moves, and we've thought about a numbering scheme for the type of warehouse that we have and whether we're going to have the opportunity to have pallet racking or not, let's think about how we're going to mark that warehouse. So when you're thinking about marking, by marking, I mean it's a visual representation of your numbering scheme. So by marking it, you can also scan. So scanning maximizes productivity, and it also reduces or minimizes mistakes and data entry errors. So this is kind of a traditional forklift. So if you think about how your employees interact with the inventory. So on a traditional forklift, the operator sits in the seat, the forks go up and down. So in this instance, the operator would, if they're scanning, they would need to scan from the driver's seat. This is known as a cherry picker. So in a cherry picker environment, the forks and the user ride up together. So the user isn't scanning from the seat of the cherry picker. They have the ability to scan directly at the level that they're picking at. And this is kind of a traditional pallet jack. Many of our customers use these to drag up and down. They'll throw a pallet on there and then drag it up and down their picking aisles, and they set boxes on it as they pick. And then with the .com explosion, the Amazons and many people doing more drop ship type orders where they're picking multiple orders at once, many people are utilizing carts where they can pick multiple orders at once. So if you have pallet racking, again, thinking about how users are interacting with the inventory, you can label, applying your numbering scheme at the level at which the inventory is at always works best. So in this instance, you would want the user scanning at the actual inventory level. In the scenario where somebody's using a traditional pallet rack or a traditional forklift, and they're not riding up in a cherry picker or getting to that top level, there's a couple different ways to handle that. But one of those ways is to not mark the inventory at the actual level, but to put a kind of a series of barcodes that represent all the levels all at the lowest level. And then the user can just scan. It's a shorter range scan, and they can scan the level. Personally, from my experience, I'm a fan of scanning where the actual inventory is at. As you can see, even though the scanning greatly reduces mistakes and it's more efficient and it's quicker, you could easily scan 144D when you were trying to scan 144E. So if you're actually scanning at the level, that it just eliminates one more opportunity for a mistake. If you don't have pallet racking and you're marking floor locations, many people use this is a placard that goes over a label that's on the floor and protects it from getting tore up. They make high-res paint in specific paints and substrates for marking on the floor, so you can mark your bins that way. Probably the most popular way when you have floor-loaded or floor storage inventory is to string a wire between the beams that we talked about earlier, and then just hang a placard over each row or each bin that's been painted on the floor. Now that you have your warehouse organized, your bin numbering scheme, and it's all marked and laid up, now you need to think about the types of technology that's going to be doing the transactions in your warehouse. So wireless infrastructure is really important. If there's one thing you learned from me today is this is not an area that you want to cut corners. I would highly recommend a professional site survey. And this is an example, a couple examples out of a professional site survey. The first one is they're going to show you where all your access points are. So these little blue boxes here, they're going to tell you where they install all their access points. You're going to get a coverage map that ensures that you're getting 40% coverage. When the devices go from access point to access point, it's critical that that transition is smooth. And they take into consideration the density of the product that you're storing in your warehouse, how high to the ceiling it is. There's so many factors that can alter wireless signal. I really strongly recommend having a professional site survey done in a professional organization to install your wireless network. That's not to say that there's not a lot of great IT guys out there that are very good with networks. We have customers that do that. And that's fine, but I think the value is that the hardware partners bring is substantial. So now that you have your wireless infrastructure, you need to choose devices. And this goes back to how are your employees interacting with the inventory. So an example here, this is the traditional fork truck where the guy sits in the seat. If he's going to be scanning at the higher levels, he's going to need is a long-range scanner. So long-range scans up to 45 feet. A standard range scanner only scans up to 15 feet. Something to note is a long-range scanner doesn't scan well at all close up. So you have to have like go-go gadget arms where, you know, you got your arms spread as far as you can possibly spread them to try and scan something that you're holding in your hand. Nowadays, though, they do have what's called an extended range scanner, and that's what I usually recommend most people buy because it can scan from 3 inches to 70 feet. So most customers just buy that multi-purpose device. Again, this is an example of somebody scanning short range. This is a 1D barcode. So a one-dimensional barcode is kind of the traditional barcode. This is a two-dimensional barcode that's becoming more and more popular. As you can see, it takes up less space than a one-dimensional barcode, and you can still hold one-dimensional data in your bin numbering scheme. And then this device is these devices are becoming more popular as well, because this device on this young lady's arm here is what's known as a wearable. And by having a wearable, the scanner's on her ring finger there, and she can just bump her fingers together to do scanning. And the nice things about wearables is both hands are free at all times. And then many of our customers use tablets as well. Tablets really have, a tablet is a two-handed operation. They really have specific purposes. Cycle counting is a good example, or a manager that just checks inventory levels, things like that. So again, think about how your employees, what functions are they doing, and how are they interacting with the inventory to ensure that you're picking the best devices. From printing options, again, think about, in the physicalness of your warehouse, think about where you need to print. Are you building pallets out of your production line? And if so, do you need to put a pallet label on every pallet? Do you need to put carton labels on every carton as they're produced? So you need to think about where your printers are located and the receiving dock. How many printers do I need on my shipping dock? Do I need portable printers? So this is a kind of a traditional printer that you might see next to a FedEx machine. This is more of a high-speed printer for EDI labels and a lot of UCC 128 label compliance. And then that's a portable printer. Many customers use this as they're picking small parts orders. They'll just print and apply a label as they pick it. So now that we've covered all the basics of things that you need to think about to turn bins on in your physical warehouse, Michael's going to go through the features and options in SAP Business One in WiSys that will help you make this real. Michael?
All right, thanks, Don. All right, so what I thought I'd do is start off with the bin location master data, just to kind of give you an overview of how bins are identified in Business One, and also some of the functionality and features of bins in Business One, because as Don mentioned in the beginning, everything we do when it comes to bins and batches and serial numbers, we do within Business One. So we don't have any side tables or anything like that to sync up. We go right to the bins within Business One. So I'm going to talk about bin management, and then I was going to kind of just take you through a little bit of our out-of-the-box Agility Essentials product to show you how we can do some simple peer receiving, be able to look at our bins on the floor, and then doing some put away, a simple transfer, and then show you how we can do like a directed picking process, and then just end up with a little bit of cycle counting. So I'm just going to kind of give you a quick little tour here. So looking at the bin location master data, Don had talked about the aisle shelf level. I think it was aisle bay level in his example. So, you know, it could be whatever you want to call it. In Business One, they allow you to define these terms. In the end, you're going to have a bin location code that looks kind of like that, and that's the ultimate bin in the system. And if you already have bins that are out there, maybe barcoded, and you're bringing bins on in the system, one of the things you can do is you could use this barcode field. So let's say you already have something out there that looks like it may be A1, S2, L3, and that's how it looks out there on the floor. You could update everything accordingly, and then we could scan and look up the bin code based on that barcode. So a couple of things in here that I just want to go through. So you can set up receiving bin location by setting this up, setting the bin up as a receiving bin location. That allows us to determine what bins are going to be set up for incoming. So for goods receipt PO, we can determine what bins will be used as a default bin. So if I go over to the handheld here and go to my options, I can do lookup from a receiving bin and only show the bins that are going to be defined as a receiving bin location. And that'll be my default bin for receiving at the receiving dock. You can exclude bins from auto allocation on issue. So when I get into directed picking and we have, you should have a pick list, it'll automatically allocate bins to go out and pick. You could set up certain bins to not be allocated. So those, you don't want those to ever be allocated on like a pick list. That's when you would check that checkbox. And then you got minimum quantity and maximum quantity, and this is convenient for replenishment. So you can set up, say, once it goes below a certain minimum quantity, you can do a replenishment process to transfer from overstock into like a picking bin. And then there's really nice restrictions that Business One offers. So item restrictions, we can restrict to a specific item. So only one specific item can go in here, or a single item. So once one item goes in there, then no other item can go in there only at any given time. And then also same thing can happen by an item group. And then unit measure restrictions, so different unit measures, specific or single. We can also restrict batches. So you can say there's only a single batch can go into this bin at any given time. And then transaction restrictions. We can lock down bins within Business One. So lock down to restricting inbound or outbound, or all except inventory transfer and counting transactions. In my demonstration, I'm going to look at this bin here. I've actually, I'm limiting this specific bin to a specific item group for servers. So when we get to doing a put away, I'll show you how that can be beneficial too. So if you can imagine, today we're working with computers in this demonstration, so it may not be as meaningful necessary, but you can think of maybe like a freezer section where there's certain sections where certain items have to go in a certain kind of freezer. So you can make a freezer a bin, and then lock down where items have to go or cannot go. All right. So let's take a look at a purchase order here. We got purchase order 1329. And let's go back to the handheld. So everything I'm showing today is part of our Agility Essentials out of the box product. And Don had mentioned that we also have, we're purpose-built product built on a tool set. So everything you see is also 100% customizable. So we're gonna look at a goods receipt PO today to start off with. And I can type. I can also do a lookup where this blue field is in any of our forms. I can do a lookup, or I can scan on that field as well. So we'll look at 1329 as our PO, and I'm going to scan my item. And you'll see that the bin is defined and defaulted to 05-doc. And that was in the options screen I showed you, where you can define the bin you want to default into. If I don't set that, then it'll actually ask me what bin do I want to receive this purchase order into. So this is convenient for when you got a truck coming at the dock, you want to get everything off the truck and into your warehouse. In 05-doc can be kind of considered like a virtual bin. It just says everything's at the dock, and we're going to put away at a later time. So type in 100 and hit enter. And so now we've just received that PO, that line into Business One, and I printed a label to the screen just so you can see what it would look like. And this label would obviously print to an actual label printer on the floor. That's defined here. In all of our screens, you just go and define, so if you're receiving, I just find to print a screen. I can choose any printer that's defined right here and on my computer. That label, PO receiving, though, was defined. Let's take a step over real quick. If we look at our options and look at our documents, document management. So purchase order, PO receiving is the PO receiving label. This was done in our label designer. This is defined as public. So it will, every goods receipt PO transaction will automatically print this label. I can exclude it from certain items or item groups, or I can make this label private and assign it to certain items or item groups. So if you got certain item groups that are smaller and you have a small label, and other item groups that might be bigger, you need a bigger label, that's no problem. We have customers that may even have 20 or 30 labels in here, just depending on what they want to print. All right, so let's look at that one more time. So we'll do one more item here. And you'll notice the other thing is I'm scanning the UPC code, the barcode inside of Business One, and translating that to the actual item. So that's another form of validation. So I'm going to go ahead and just receive another 100 of this item, and we'll get our label. Okay. So now that we've got inventory sitting in our dock, if we're ever curious, what do we have in our system, we can pull up our item view and scan our item. And with the up and down arrow keys, there's up and down arrow keys on the actual handheld. I can just flip through the warehouses. So I can see how much is in stock, committed, ordered, and available in every warehouse. And when I get to a warehouse that's binned, I can also click the bin button. I can see now I've got 100 sitting at 05-dock, and I can see where all my inventory currently sitting. Now this is pulling data right out of Business One. So these are actual, what's in the actual bins inside of Business One there. So let's do a put away process, and let's scan our first item that we received. Okay, so there's our JB Office Print 1420. It's also going to give us a heads up as to what the default bin is. You can put it anywhere at this point, but it just tells you what that default bin is. If you wanted to use our tool sets and lock that down, you could certainly create a rule in there that says that the bin that I scan has to be the default bin. So if that's how you use default bins, if that's a rule, then you can use it that way. So I'll just scan the bin, and I'm going to type in 100 and do my transfer. All right, now I'll just do it with the other item too real quick. And we'll put it into its bin. And there we go. So now if we go back over to our item view and scan that same item and go look at our bin, we can now see it's all been moved into that 353 bin, and the 05-dock bin is empty, so it's not showing up. Okay. So the other thing we can do is just a simple inventory transfer. So if on the fly you want to do an inventory transfer, and again, this is really important when we get into bins. Like all this flow of bins, as Don was talking about, is if you aren't using a WMS, then you're handwriting these things down, and you make sure you get those bins right typed in the system. If you do the wrong bin, you're going to get them all off, and then you don't know what's in your bins. So it's really important you're scanning this information as you go. So I would scan my item, and I was going to do. So it's kind of like an ad hoc transfer, and I'll scan the bin that I had it in, and I'll move it over to this bin, and we'll just move 10. Okay, so again, if we go look at our item view, scan our item, and look in here, we can now see that we just moved 10 into this other bin 331. So it's all real time happening inside of Business One, so you can see how convenient that is. Okay, so let's move into a directed picking process. So Don had talked about direction, and so bins are really important when it comes to direction. So we need to know what bin sequence to move you into through the warehouse. So I have the sales order 1273, and I'm going to look at the pick list for this one. This pick list, when we created the pick list, it automatically allocated a bunch of bins. Right here, you'll see the bins have been allocated to this pick list. So you'll see that we have A01, 001, 2, 3, and 4. But if you look at the bin sequence, it's actually this second one first, and then the last one, and then the first one, and then the third one. So it's going to be dependent on how we go through the warehouse based on the bins. All right. So I'm going to, on the handheld, I'm going to go to my directed sales order picking process. And I'm just going to type in 55, which is my pick list number. And you see it's taking me to the A1S2L1. It's the first bin and the sequence. All right, so it wants me to pick the A002 item, so I'll pick that one. So it's validating that I'm getting the right item. And I want to scan the correct bin to pick from, and I'm going to put in 3. Okay, as soon as we do that, it's now been picked. So that first item now, if we go back and look at this pick list, we can see we've just picked 3 of that item. Okay, so we're just going to keep picking these items as we go along here. All right, so now it's going to take me to go to 153. Okay, so I'm going to scan my item again to validate it, scan the bin, and pick 2. And we'll just keep going. So we'll scan the item, validate the bin, 2 of those. And lastly, validate the bin, and then pick 1. So we'll keep going until it tells us that this pick list is fully picked. Okay, and then once it's fully picked, we just simply click the delivery button, and we just now created that delivery note out of that pick list. So if we go in here and refresh it, we can see now it's been closed. And if we go look at the pick list, we can see everything's been picked successfully from the appropriate bins that were allocated. All right. So last thing I wanted to show real quick is cycle counting. So I'm going to go into our inventory counting here, and we've got a document 4. So I just created a cycle count document. And so now we'll go back to the handheld. One of the things we offer is inventory count by bin. So the nice thing about that is once I put my document in, I can scan a particular bin, and then I can just start counting all the items that I see in this bin. So if you have multiple items in that bin, you start with the bin and just start counting the items in that bin. So in this case, I would put in my A0002, and I counted 3 of those, okay? And if I do that again, let's say I find a little bit more in the back of the bin somewhere, I counted 3, I found 2 more, okay? So if I count that, it'll just keep appending to the count. Okay, so now I've counted a total of 5. Okay, so if I go look at this cycle count document, and in here 0, so obviously it was way off. I counted 5 as 850. So we have a variance there. All right, so if we just go in here and let's do that one more time, and let's count another 845. All right, so now we got the 850. So at this point, once you count everything, we just go through and copy to an inventory posting and post the cycle counts back into Business One. All right, well, that's it. That's all I really wanted to show, just to kind of take you a quick run through demo of some of the out-of-the-box product. So at this point, I think we could probably open up for some questions if there are any questions out there.
Michael, we do have one question right now from the audience. They want to know if WiSys uses the bin locations in SAP B1.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So everything we do, our philosophy is that we don't do any synchronization. And when we do a transaction, we want to make sure that we're updating Business One tables real time. So bins, batches, serial numbers, we make sure we validate and update those as we go.
Great. I think that's the only question we have right now. If anybody has any questions right now, though, I'd be happy if you want to insert them into the app. I can have them answered, and you can continue asking questions if you want to do offline. You're more than welcome to email us. You will be receiving a copy of this webinar, and we would like to thank you for attending. Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Don. And again, we'll be reaching out to you with the results of this webinar. Thank you, guys. Have a great day.